ladies and gentlemen, he's got a knack for turning stories into transformative leadership experiences. And with his geek-level tech smarts, RK3 is here to not only educate, but to entertain. Get ready to amplify your digital presence as we're joined by the president of Kinetic Communications, Robert Kennedy III, or as the cool kids call him, RK3. Welcome aboard, sir.
Come on, y'all. What's going on? Let's partay. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Come on, people. Where's my dude? Oh, I need this guy kind of coming to come on.
Oh, hello. Hi.
Yeah, all right.
For our listeners on the podcast, RK3 just brought I don't know, a party of all kinds of, like, I think it looked like a cat wearing a Batman thing and just confetti.
It's my Gangnam Style cat. I don't know.
You know how to make an entrance, sir. That was next level.
That was an original.
That
was an original. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Outstanding.
We're here. So listen, I like making an entrance because I heard you talking about speaking. And as speakers, we've got content that we've got to share, and the content is crucial, but you also want it to be memorable. And one of the best ways to make it memorable is when you yourself are memorable. So never will people talk about your show again, especially where Robert Kennedy III is concerned, and they're not going to say, oh, remember that dude that had the confetti and it had the dancing and he had the cat? He had the yellow cat with the Batman mask, right? And so now that's like an anchor that they connect to other stuff. So I like to say people give us permission power. I was doing a talk a couple of weeks ago, and people talked about how people's attention spans are so short these days. I'm like, that's a load of crock, right? People will pay attention to what they want to pay attention to. They will sit down and watch a 3-hour movie, and they will watch it. The issue is that now they've got so many different options that it's up to you as a creator, it's up to you as a presenter, it's up to you as a speaker to get their permission to have their attention. And you've got to do it more regularly. I get that. Yeah. But, they've got options. They don't like you. Boom. Tune out. Let me go to my phone. Don't like you. Tune out. Let me go call somebody. I don't like you. Tune out. Let me go look at something else. Yeah. So it's just the options. Our job is to be memorable.
Yeah. So many people are talking about everyone's attention span is shorter now than a goldfish. But I agree. It's like everyone just has less patience for boring content, for content that won't, grab their attention, and not just grab their attention, with, to stop the scroll. That's one thing, right? But once they stop, you got to keep them, you got to keep them going. And you, sir, have been on stages for many years and have that experience, not from a virtual standpoint, before you started doing the virtual stuff, before 2020 happened and the pandemic happened. We're not gonna say those words, but before all of that happened, you were on stage and actually physically seeing people at times maybe picking up their phone. Yep. What are some of the ways that when you obviously preparation, right? But during the course of it, what are some of the ways maybe on stage that you've transitioned into the virtual space as to keep people's attention?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of different ways. One of the things that I recommend you do is study comedians. Comedians have a really good way of pattern disrupting and keeping people's attention. They start sharing something, they start sharing a story, and then they'll take something totally left, because your brain, even when we're distracted, our brain is kind of multitasking. We're kind of sort of paying attention because we want to tune in to see if that thing on stage or whatever's happening over there is worth paying attention to still. So if nothing is happening that is grabbing our attention or causing us to turn back, then we stay focused on the phone or whatever else it is. But if there's something that happens on stage, you're like, oh, okay, what just happened? For example, I might be on stage and I might say I might be in the middle of a story, and then I'll go behind my podium and whip out. I'm like, and I'll whip out something that now grabs their attention, right? So it's not only the visual of this, it is also the auditory of this. So I'm pulling two of their senses as opposed to just one. I'm disrupting two of their senses at that point. Right? Because if they go down in their phone, now their visual is paying attention to something else. Their auditory is kind of halfway paying attention to something else. But if I do something like this, okay, yep, now I have disrupted both of those senses. And so the brain naturally begins to turn to what's the most interesting thing at that point. So my job, if I see them, is to figure out, okay, how can I keep them in a space where they are wondering what's next, but I'm also putting their brains into a space where they're creating their own experiences based on what I'm triggering or what I'm anchoring or sharing from the stage.
I love it. Just like that, the whole create the curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Put that person, like let's put our audience in these shoes. And make them curious, and that's going to keep their attention. I love that. That's great. And speaking of curiosity, I'm curious as to why my my Ecamm is not allowing comments on this section. We've got crazy comments happening on LinkedIn, so I'm just going to give them shout outs here. Natalie Gregg is in the house. Doug Lehman,
oh Natalie, what's going on, lady?
Breaking it down in layman's terms. Jenny Gold is in the house. We appreciate you guys chiming in on the chat. Lots of requotes from Natalie. Your content is crucial, so you always want to make it memorable. Thank you for that. RK3, studying comedians is a good point. And Doug Lehman says, stood on many stages and held many mics, RK3. So you're getting some shout outs on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I'm not able to pop these on to the screen, so we're going to go. But I wanted to make everybody aware that we do see you. Feel free to keep it going. Robert, let's back up a little bit, man. You jumped in. You had the animals and the clappers on the screen, and it just you talk about pattern interrupt. This host is all screwed up. I got nowhere to go.
Yeah,
but I did my research on you, sir. Because we don't wing this thing, and I'm a fan of your content, have been for years. But there's a couple of things that I saw that I kind of I would love for you to unpack. First of all, you've held a ton of jobs. I mean, you were a real estate agent, a news anchor. You built websites. You started businesses. You were promoting artists. You were a musician. You've been in bands. You've done a gospel album. Just all kinds of stuff, which ended up leading you to this point where you were doing training and speaking on stages. And that feels like a ton of disparate things that led you to this platform. Give us the learnings you made from those jobs and how that led you to this place.
Yeah. So it's funny. They seem like very different things. But when you look back, the common through line in all of them is communication. So I was a teacher as well. I was a high school teacher for 8 years, man. And I was on the radio before that. The interviewing for business, the promotion, all of that really was about me being in a space where I was transmitting information to other people and learning how to do it in a way that was palatable, that was engaging for them, and allowed them to not only see themselves in the stories or in the information that I was sharing, but allowed them to become even more curious about some of the next steps that they themselves could take in life. I just started to ramble for a second. I forgot your question, dude. Go ahead.
No, it's you had all of these things that led you to speaking, but you're right. The common thread is teaching people, and inevitably, and it's really your thing is like, listen, the best way to lead, right, is to do this, is to get on these stages virtually and in purpose. And one of the things that resonated with me that you said was communication transfers information, but connection creates transformation.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So I think all of us have had the experience where we've been at a conference or we've been in a room where we've seen somebody on stage and they are speaking about something. And you leave the room And 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later, somebody says, "Hey, how'd you enjoy the talk?" And you're like, "Yeah, it was cool." And they said, "What'd they talk about?" You're like, um, I totally don't remember. It wasn't memorable. They said a bunch of stuff. It was important. I know it was because people clapped at the end and they had graphs on the slides. And so it must have been important. But if people don't connect with you, then you're not going to remember the information. And then the most important thing is you're not going to act on the information that was shared. Right. And so my job, when people come to me and they say, "Hey, Robert, what's the best way for me to start a speech, or how do I start talking?" I say, listen, one of the things that you've got to do is get inside their brains right from the beginning. And one of the best ways to do that is by asking a question up front. Because here's how the brain works. The brain is like this Rolodex that is always seeking to make connecting points. And so from the time that you ask a question, the brain immediately starts to say, "Hey, did I experience that? Do I want to experience that? Do I not want to experience that? Have I experienced that before?" And so people turn in, and there's a video that begins playing in their brain. So I tell people, ask a question. How many of you have ever fallen off of your bicycle? People say, okay, my brain starts like, okay, cool. People raise their hands, but there's something that is starting to trigger inside their brains. They're searching for that experience, right? And so if I go up and I'm like, "Hi, I'm Robert, and I'm so glad to be here with you today. I traveled from Maryland, and boy, are my arms tired." But okay. People are like, "Yeah, that was great. That was great."
We'll get right back to the show, but first I wanted to tell you about Social Media News Live. Jeff C. and his amazing guests will keep you up to date on what's happening in this entire changing world of social media. They talk with industry experts and innovators and creators about the latest social media news, tips, and tactics, and they broadcast live, so you can ask the questions that matter most to you and your business. Jim and I love this show, and we know that you will too. Head over to socialmedianewslive.com. Hey, tell them Dealcaster sent you. Now back to the show.
Yeah. Right? So I want them to engage right from the beginning. I want to hijack their brain cells right from the beginning so that the experience then becomes about them and not so much about me.
Love it. Love it. Jim, you had a question?
Yeah. So Robert, you're talking about storytelling. It definitely sounds like, by your background, got a lot of different stories. What do you think keeps us from feeling like our story is worthwhile? And what can we do to get that story out there? Because it's like, does anybody really care that Chris used to work for Sony or that I was in the Marines? It was like, there's lots of people that have done that stuff. Why would they want to hear our story?
Yeah. So you won't be able to answer that question until you tell your story. A lot of people don't think that their stories are dramatic enough, traumatic enough, life-changing enough, world-changing, groundbreaking. They're like, "Oh, people only pay for stories if I was in an accident or if I climbed Kilimanjaro and I fell down on the second peak and I recovered. I was covered by an avalanche and I was able to make it through with a straw and a little pickaxe." But everybody connects with something that they've been through. So when I ask the question, how many people have ever fallen off of their bicycle? How many of you have ever fallen down and skinned your knee? That is not this great groundbreaking thing, but it's something that connects with people because it's a common experience. There's a story that I tell on stage about me learning to ride my bicycle for the first time at the age of 8. And when I tell the story, there's so many leadership lessons inside of it. I'm connecting with managers and CEOs and executives in this audience. And the story is not about anything leadership related. It's not even about executives or business. It's about me learning to ride my bicycle one time and the experience around that, and people connect with that. So, I'll tell the story a little bit later on if y'all have a little bit of time to hear it. But,
we got all the time in the world for you, man.
So here's the story. I was 8 years old. I lived in Montreal, Canada for about a year and a half. And close to the end of the time there, my parents left and I was at a friend's house. So I said to him, "Man, I want to learn how to ride my bicycle today." And he points out the window and he says, that's how you learn how to ride the bicycle. So I look out the window and I see a bunch of kids out there and they have parents pushing them along. And that's how they were keeping their balance. Now, we didn't have parents at home that day. This was back in the day when you could leave 8-year-olds alone at home without any consequences or repercussions. Yeah. So it was me, him, and his sister. And she was like a year older than us. So I'm like, we don't have any parents. Your sister's not strong enough to push me. So I want to figure this out. So we go outside. He hops on his bicycle in the garage. He leaves me his sister's bike with a pink basket and the ting, 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 ting bell on the front. So, so I hop on the bicycle and I push it to the sidewalk and I start to try to ride. Bang! I fall down and I skin my knee. I'm like, crap, that doesn't feel good. I pick up the bike and I try to ride again. And this time I'm like wobbling for a couple of seconds and I fall again. I don't know how I figured this out, but I noticed that his driveway went on a decline down into the garage, which was underneath the house. So I go to the driveway and I hop on the bike and I notice that it's easier for me to balance on the bicycle if I'm going downhill, right? Because I guess I don't have to push against the pedals and the speed. Yeah. It starts to take off naturally so I can balance. So I do that for a little bit. Roll down the hill into the garage, start turning, doing a few different things. After about 30 minutes, I'm like, I think I got the hang of this. I can take this out onto the street. I can take my act onto the road. So I take the bicycle on the road and I pedal for a few moments and I stumble. I don't fall all the way. I have to put my feet down. And I'm like, this is taking longer than I want. I noticed that at the end of the block, there's a hill. So I take the bike and I push it over to the end of the street. And I balance myself. I perch on the top of the hill. I look down the hill. I see the hill and I take a deep breath. I'm like, okay. So I start to push the bike and it goes down the hill. Bike starts to go down the hill. I put my feet on the pedal and it starts to cycle, right? The pedals are going round and round. I'm like, okay, this is cool. Bike is starting to pick up a little bit of speed. I'm like, okay, cool. My feet are on the pedals. This bike is picking up even more speed. And it starts to go faster and faster and faster until my feet fly off of the pedals. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And so I'm going down the hill. And guess what? At the bottom of the hill, there's this intersection. And I'm getting closer and closer and closer to this intersection. And it hits me that there was something I forgot to teach myself in the driveway: braking. I had no idea how to stop the bike. Right? So I'm getting closer and closer to this intersection and I realize, okay, over on my left there's this lawn. So I take the bike and I like fling it onto the lawn. I fly off the bike. The bike goes one way. I go another way. I like roll through this fence and I've got dirt and clumps all over me. And when I get to a stop, I look up at the top of the hill. I see my friend. He's got the Home Alone face, like up at the top of the hill, right? So he's down there looking like, oh my gosh, what just happened to Rob? And I get up and I'm like, yeah. I raise my hands because I'd ridden my bike down the hill. So I'm telling this story to executives. And along the way, I repeat some things and I stop and I say, I know that sometimes we've been in meetings where somebody said things had to be done a certain way, and you believe them. My friend told me that the only way to learn how to ride was by being pushed. I didn't believe him. And I say innovation is sometimes in trying things, being courageous and doing something a different way. And then I go to the top of the hill with them and I say, how many times have you been on a project and it started out okay and you thought you had it handled? And then you're going down and then all of a sudden your feet fly off the pedals and you are totally out of control on this project. You know you're missing deadlines. You don't have enough resources. You don't have anything that you need. And oh, by the way, there is an intersection coming up and you're bracing yourself for this big crash and you realize that there was something crucial that you forgot to do. You forgot to equip the team with in order to make this project successful. Anybody feel like that? Every hand goes up. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's me. Right? And then I say, okay, you get down to the bottom of the hill and you crash. And now everybody looks at that crash as something negative. But when something happens, you can either sulk inside of that, or you can say, what's the feedback? What's the lesson that we need to learn inside of this? As a matter of fact, what is the thing that you can celebrate inside of this?
Oh, that's good.
right? And so I'm like, I chose to focus on the journey. I chose to focus on the fact that I didn't have to push the bike down the hill. I didn't have to wibble and wobble. I didn't fall going down. I was in control all the way down the hill. Even if it wasn't perfect, I made it down the hill. And then I stood up and I raised my hands in celebration because I got some ways to go, but that was a great experience. And that's what I chose to focus on. So I'm telling that to business owners and, C-suites, and they're like, oh, that's so good. Oh, that's so good. But it was a story about me learning to ride my bicycle at 8.
We're going to get right back to the show, but first I wanted to introduce you to the amazing Cloudlifter CL1 from Cloud Microphones. This amazing little blue box boosts your dynamic podcast mic signal for pristine audio quality in just seconds. Jim and I love ours, and you can snag one of these CL1s or new Cloudlifter X's for yourself from the links in the show notes below. Elevate your audio content with the Cloudlifter. Now, back to the show. Okay. Yeah, I'm glad we took that time because that was awesome. And ultimately, it wasn't, to your point, and I want to go here too, because I think a lot of people get stuck in crafting their story, like Jim was alluding to, but also like actually taking a stage and telling, either in person or virtually. And I think a lot of times people think their story has to be traumatic. Or it has to be, like you said, this is, climbing the Himalayas and survive for 5 years eating, berries, whatever. And they think that it has to be something like that goes in a novel where you could just take something that actually happened with you because it is your story to tell and apply it to that audience. And it also doesn't have to be sad. Nope. Or end up with someone, getting hurt or dying. It can be actually a happy story as well. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that storytelling thing. Yeah. How, when you're working with people, because I know you're also a coach. It's one of the things that you do. Is how do you work with someone to get past that mind junk so that they can, they start telling you stories about what they did, and how can you say, okay, you can take that story and apply it here and here and here, and maybe some of the practical ways that they can start to elaborate, unpack that story, and start to tell it.
I find that people are not really scared of telling their stories once they start telling them. Because it's them, it's authentic, it's real. They don't have to practice it. They know it. They don't have to worry about whether they got the line right or wrong. They know it. They were in it. They were the main character of it. The issue is that we are nervous about telling the right story or having a story to tell because we don't capture the stories that take place for us. There's a great book. Y'all look this up on Amazon, and I don't know if y'all have a link for it, but there's a great book called Storyworthy by Matthew Dix.
Oh, yeah.
And in that book, Matthew
book.
Dix has this process that he undertakes every day. At the end of each day, he writes down 5 experiences that happened during that day. And it doesn't matter what it is. It could have been, hey, I stopped at the gas station for gas today, and my card wasn't working when I tried to swipe it on the outside, so I had to go inside and pay. Right? That's an experience. So he writes down 5 experiences, 5 things that happened, met somebody randomly on the elevator, 5 things, and then he draws a line, and on the other line, he writes at the top, lessons. And now he writes down, what are the lessons that I can take away from each of those experiences today? Now, is he going to remember every single story and be able to whip it out of his back pocket on a moment's notice every single time? No, but the practice of replaying small, seemingly insignificant experiences over the course of time leads you to several things. You begin to make connections between stories. You realize that you've had some experiences multiple times. And you begin to say, oh, yeah, I experienced that last week and the week before and the week before. Why do I keep experiencing the same thing? Oh, my gosh, something's wrong with me. No. Right? We realize and we start to make connections. And when we make those connections, we can begin to share those connections. The other thing that I'll share is people think that they have to go far to find a story. And you can find a story in anything. You can find a story in when was the first time that you did something? When was a time that you had to learn a new skill? When was a time that you took a test? Maybe it was your driver's test. And that's a common experience. How many people drive cars? The majority of the United States, probably a lot of people in the world, and you had to study for some sort of test. You remember the learner's permit experience. You remember the road test experience, right? If you're in business, my wife, she's a project manager, and she had to take her PMP exam, right? And she was like, oh my gosh, the hell of studying for my PMP, right? If she says that, people who have the PMP who are looking at it, they're like, oh my gosh, yes, girl. Right? And there's a connection that they're immediately making, but it's a simple experience. And we all live experiences and situations every day. It's a matter of capturing it so that you can then pull on it when you need it.
I love that. And nowadays you have ChatGPT in your pocket, and you just start recording that stuff, right? You can always go back to it. You have a repository for that. But you also have a way to kind of help organize your thoughts, right? Because how many times have you, from the story-worthy examples, and you're writing down things that happen throughout the day, and you're like, oh, I need a story as it relates to this, that, and another. You go back and look at it, and you're like, I can't even read my writing, or like, I don't even remember that, or they're not all going to work. But if they just happen, and you just let them happen, and then you don't, apply it in some way, shape, or form, not every one of them, it's almost like you're just, I don't know, they're like golden nuggets you just left on the shelf.
They are. And the thing about that is, the more that you tell a story, the better you become at it, and the more impactful it can become. So I'll even look at the bicycle story. The very first time I mentioned it was with a mastermind group that I was with, and we were talking about, I don't even remember how it started, but I shared the story. And after I told the story, they were like, dude, why haven't you told us that story before? I said, it's just a story about me learning how to ride when I was 8. But they're like, no, that story is super rich with experiences. And so the first few times that I told it, and it was a good story. But by the time I got to like 10, 11, 12 times telling it, I could feel myself back in that moment, and all of it.
Had some seasoning to it.
And all of the energy of it. And so now, because I'm feeling it, you begin to tell it in a way, you begin to become synced with the pauses or the moments of suspense in that story, or the lines that you should share. So for example, when I'm telling the story, and now I include the line of, okay, I'm going down the hill and I'm coming close to the intersection. And as I get closer to the intersection, I remember that there's something that I forgot to teach myself in the driveway: braking. Right? That came over time. Right? I didn't tell it
That's
that
a hook
way.
Right there.
Yeah, but I didn't tell it that way the first time that I told it. Right? But I recognize that you kind of have people leaning in, kind of hanging on the edge of their seats, hanging on your words at that point. And you're like, okay, how can I do a little bit of a pattern disrupt? Because I've got the momentum started, and I've got them going down this hill, and they're rolling down this hill with me, and they're seeing this intersection with me, and they're getting ready for the crash. How can I give them a little bit of a right turn before the crash? Right. And so I'm like, I remember this one thing, braking. They're like, oh my God, dude. And so now they're back in the driveway. Like, why didn't you learn? and so what happens is they're thinking about all sorts of stuff at that point. They're like, is it one of those bikes with the handlebar brakes? And dude, you didn't know how to just reach your hands forward? Or is it one of those bicycles where you got to push backwards on the pedals, and that causes it to stop? And they're thinking like, oh my gosh, I remember my first time riding bike and trying to do that backwards thing, and it didn't work for me. And so, so I'm adding in these little nuances that make the story even better. And, people think, okay, why would I tell the same story over and over? That's exactly why, because you become better at it, and it makes even more of an impact.
Yeah, and I think we're kidding ourselves too, that we think that, the content that we've put out and maybe said generally the same thing before, like everyone's seen it, so you can't say it again. It's like, not only do you get that, that rep in, so you could tell it better, add some seasoning. Yeah, I tell you what, the thing that got me, the other thing that got me with that story is you said your feet came off the pedals and it kept going, because I remember that. I went right back to that moment when I was riding the Schwinn banana seat, for the first time, and that happens to you, because if you start going too fast, and all of a sudden your feet get off, and it keeps going without you. And that one caught me too. There's so many lessons in that. And the other thing too is you're not winging this stuff, right? I mean, when I was on your show a few weeks ago with Tanya Smith, shout out to Livestream Like a Boss, we started talking about process. And I'll admit, I'm not the best at processing. I'm a lot of okay, I got a general straw man framework, and then we're gonna go, and I'm gonna put the water in the pool on my way down while I'm diving in, or fix the plane before it lands, whatever the comparison is.
Build it while you're flying.
Yes, exactly. But Tanya is incredibly process oriented, and you elaborated on your show about your process, because you do a solo show, you do interview show, but you also do a solo show, and I think a lot of live streamers, someone who does a podcast that is a solo show, a teaching, a training, they get the blank page syndrome, or they try to get something that's spit out in ChatGPT and it doesn't feel like them. But you have a really interesting process, and I wonder if you could kind of share how you do that, especially like the Monday motivation. By the way, is Monday motivation? I know you're taking a bit of
We're coming back this Monday, February 17th is our first day back.
Awesome. That is like a 7 a.m. Monday. LinkedIn, right?
LinkedIn and YouTube.
We're going to get right back to the show, but first I wanted to tell you about the game changer for your audio setup. Of course, it's the one and only Shure SM7B microphone. This iconic beauty is a go-to for top-notch podcasts. You've seen it on stream. It's the perfect microphone for any environment. You don't need a fancy studio. It's got built-in protection that handles background noise like a pro. Jim and I love ours, and you can level up your audio game today. Just check out the show notes for the links. Now back to the show. LinkedIn and YouTube. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I'll have to let RK3 finally answer his question that I have sort of answered and or asked and left. But make sure you connect with this gentleman. Go to robertkennedy3.com. That's where you can connect with him on LinkedIn. Fantastic content all around, and on YouTube as well, which is at robertkennedy3. So your process. Sir, I'd love to hear again, how that works, and I'm sure the audience will as well.
So for this show, and for a lot of shows, I look at a few different things. Number one, what is something that I can use to grab the audience's attention at the beginning? And because I talked about permission power before, your audience is always giving you permission for their attention. What are the nuggets or the data points that I can insert or seed throughout the episode or throughout our time together that keep them thinking or engaged? And so with my show, I have an outline, a delivery outline that I typically follow. And I know you're inside of, and why is this so small? Nope. I don't know. Well, we'll figure this out after. But let me actually do it this way.
All right. I can maybe zoom you up a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think I messed up my my template here. But anyway, so I've got a template that I use. And so at the beginning of the show, I do I have a quote, and then I've got my show openers, and then I move into a point. And I don't know if everybody can see this large enough or not, but I'll highlight some of the stuff. Then I've got a point that I make. I share a story, and then I talk about the point from the story. And then after that, I have what I call a sound bite. And a sound bite is a simple statement that is memorable. And a soundbite typically includes something like a comparison, a contrast, some sort of alliteration, some sort of rhyme, something that people can use to remember the information that you're sharing. And even if they don't remember the story or the information that you're sharing, the soundbite helps them to remember something important. So, for example, if I'm telling people a story or if I'm sharing information about motivating or inspiring yourself, and I talk about in order for you to be inspired long term, you've got to know your why. You've got to know your why. And then I'll add a soundbite. I'll say, if your why isn't strong enough, you won't be around long enough. Right. And so that is something that I incorporate into my show as I walk through, because I want to transition through different concepts or thoughts around an idea. But I want to have these little statements that make people say, or yeah, that was good. Or okay, yeah, that's how I can put that together. So it doesn't. I'm not that smart, right? I don't come up with those on the spot. Right? There's some people that have talent to do it for doing that. I've got a friend, Del Toro McNeil. He's like, he comes up with those pretty easily and quickly. I've got another friend, Quinn Conyers, and she's in the MC world, but she's like the queen of alliteration. And she talks about luxury language and discount dialect. And she talks about a lot of different, and she uses alliteration as a vehicle to help people remember ideas. So because I'm not as smart as these people, I literally write it down and say, okay, yep, I'm going to add a memory point. I'm going to add a soundbite right here. And then I go figure out what that soundbite is. Now, let's get into AI for just a second. You talked about ChatGPT. And one of the things that happens is people go to ChatGPT, and we're doing a training right here real quick, Chris.
Let's go.
People go to ChatGPT and they type in some prompts. But here's the thing. If you go into the ChatGPT mobile app, right, there is a little button right here that when you click it, this comes up.
What would you like to talk about today?
Right. So chat starts talking to me. So we have a conversation. And I'm like, hey, Chatzilla, what's good? How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. How about you? Everything going smoothly?
Life is grandiose. Listen, I'm getting ready to do a podcast on Monday morning about making sure that you stay motivated. Please give me 3 points that I can talk about. And then for each point, create a sound bite.
That sounds like a fantastic topic. Here are 3 points to keep your audience engaged. 1, set clear goals. Soundbite: when you know your why, motivation naturally follows. Define your goals and the path becomes clearer. 2, celebrate small wins. Soundbite: every milestone, no matter how small, is a step closer to your big dream. Celebrate them to stay motivated. 3, keep learning and growing. Soundbite: staying curious and always learning keeps the fire of motivation burning bright. How do these sound for your podcast?
They sound pretty good. Say goodbye to me using a Jamaican accent.
All right, take care. Until we chat again, walk good.
Right? So I've used AI now to shortcut some of my process. And now it's got the sound bites, and I can kind of look and say, okay, that one is okay. I don't really want to use that, but I got something to build off. I've got something to build from.
Exactly.
And now I don't have to sit here at 5 o'clock in the morning thinking like, oh, God, how do I...
What am I going to say?
Yeah, and then you just end up winging it. I think that's the best way to use it. The best way to use it is to help you get off of the blank page and to start going it. But I think the key there is inserting yourself into that loop and being yourself. You know, I mean, you just shared that, and obviously there's going to, including Rich Graham, who's joining us on YouTube. He says it's wild, and we're going to use that. But and they weren't bad. Like Some of those I'm like, okay, and there's some rhyming going on, right? Not I didn't hear any alliteration, but I did hear some
typically
rhyming.
when I've done that before, I'll tell it in the soundbite, include rhymes, include contrast, include alliteration. And so it's the same way when you tell you tell the AI what tone you want to speak. But I'm just having conversations. You see these things on Instagram, they're like, oh, you got to tell AI, here's 10 great prompts. Forget the prompts, right? Just have a conversation. Like if you had hired somebody in your team, you're trying to get them to do a job, have a conversation about it. And so that's were we supposed to veer into AI? I just kind of went off the deep end, dude.
Listen, this is how we do it, man. This is how we do it.
No, that was neat. I guess the question I have too, because you were using ChatGPT, was that a paid or free version?
I use the paid version. Listen, if you're not,
come on,
if you're not investing in yourself or your business in that way, I mean, for some people, I get it. $240 a year, $20 a month, maybe something steep. If you are doing something anyway, and you're serious about business, and you have some processes that help you make money, if you have something that takes you 20 hours to do, and you could shortcut that down to 20 minutes, now you're faster to getting that money. You're a lot closer to getting that money. So, listen, I was like, here, take my card. Take it. Because there's so much that I'm doing with this stuff. There's stuff that I would either have to wake up early to do myself and think about, or I would have to hire somebody to do. Now, not that I don't still hire people, and people are like, AI is taking jobs. No, it's not necessarily taking jobs. It's forcing us to think about how to do new jobs going into the future. So the people that will get jobs are the people that will that know how to leverage AI to do some things better. That's like people saying, oh, we don't need accountants anymore because we got calculators now. Dude, no, you still need the people to do the math in, right? Because not all of us like it. Not all of us like it. So,
Yeah. Well, that's like when Chris with the repurposing, not everybody wants to do that. I mean, you could learn. You focus on being a speaker, which is, what is your talent, but not everybody wants to speak. They're like, oh, I'd rather, be behind the scenes, things of that nature. Now, I think that's a great point with what you showed with AI, because I think the fact that you're using it as a way to kind of speed the process up, because, that's probably our most valuable asset, right? Is our time. And so we're going to spend hours like, well, gosh, I got to think of something where you just did several, great starting points in literally a couple of minutes. It's and it
wasn't even a couple of minutes. It was like about 15 seconds. I just spent the other minute 45 bantering with Chatzilla, saying, hey, what's up? I was like buttering her up so that she would be better for me. I don't.
There you go.
Well, and you made it fun too. Like, say goodbye to me in a Jamaican accent, and just to me, you can kind of make things fun. And I love the fact that you're adding your personal seasoning to everything. It's so important, because I feel like even those things that ChatGPT, Chatzilla, whatever her name was, is giving you, I always get the sense that this was used somewhere else. It's not completely like somebody's giving it to you, to your point, like somebody, your intern or whatever is giving you this. Like, pause and take that extra time to add something else to not necessarily make it 100% your own, but to really, think about how to use it. Don't just rubber stamp it and send it out into the wild and expect it's going to land. And I love that you did that. So let's talk a little bit more about speaking, because listen, every time I've been in contact with you, like we were on your show, and we're going back and forth on emails. You're replying from some airport. You're in Minneapolis. You're in Detroit. You're all over. We met in Florida. Like you're all over the place, speaking on lots of stages. I know you do a lot of stuff for NSA, and that business, I did want to talk a little bit about that, about the business of speaking, because I think there's a number of people that that are out there, and it kind of feels like this walled garden and this Rubik's cube of trying to figure out how they could, how do they start? Like, is there there's not like like here's the exact formula you need to do steps 1 through 4 or whatever. But what may be some practical things that someone who is thinking about being a professional speaker that maybe has some skills in telling their story and communicating with leaders and wanting to do that, you having gone through that and having a career doing that, what would you say to
It's
them?
like any other business, right? I think the issue for a lot of people is they want somebody to come up to them and say, hey, I heard you speak. Here's $5,000. Come on and speak for us. Just like randomly, you're standing on the sidewalk, no signs, no nothing, just random people coming up to you. No, that's not how it works. It's like any business. If you have a business, how do you begin to sell product? Well, you got to figure out, number one, what people want, what problems they have so that you can solve it. Okay, yep, I see that. All right. The second thing is, where are those people? Where are they hanging out? Where do they gather? Where do they get help? Where do they frequent? Where do they get information? So if you know that people are on Facebook, okay, cool. We'll go to certain spaces of Facebook. I'm going to go to certain Facebook groups. I may need to do Facebook ads, whatever it is that I need to get in front of the people. The other, if you're in the speaking space or you want to speak more, where do people gather that are focused on the topic? So if I think about real estate, okay, if I want to speak to real estate agents, okay, where do real estate agents gather? Okay, they may gather at meetups. They would gather at trainings or meetings at the brokerages. They would gather at real estate conferences. They would gather at real estate association meetings, right? They would gather at the state real estate commission events or whatever continuing education. So I've got to do some work and some research into that. And okay, maybe you don't want to go doing that research in the official professional spaces. Maybe it's that you want to gather and figure out where are people giving summits, right? Because there are a lot of online summits. And if you're attending summits and you're in the chat or if you're in the comments and you're seeing the questions that people are asking and you can answer them, then you can approach the summit host or the organizer and say, hey, I thought this question was phenomenal. Here's my answer to it. I would love to address it with your audience next time, right? Clubhouse is still a thing. You can go on Clubhouse and speak on a stage for free and get people's attention if you have a great way of presenting yourself and engaging and garnering people's attention. Right. So there's so many different places to start. And yeah, not everybody's going to get paid right away. But the point is not getting paid right away. The point is getting the attention, getting the experience, getting the eyeballs so that when people begin to ask questions, you can say, yes, I spoke here. Yes, I did this. Yes, here's my video of me speaking for this group. Here's the summit. Here's this podcast. Here's this live stream that I was on where I was sharing. I was talking about mental health, or I was talking about workplace engagement and bullying, or whatever the topic is. Speak about it in spaces where your people gather. Yep.
Act, right? Go and start doing it. And I love how you touched on the, hey, don't be afraid to go like local, regional, right? And start where are these people hanging out? If you don't automatically just show up and get on Madison Square Garden stage, right? You've got to start in boardrooms and conference tables. That don't necessarily have chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, right? And start training people and going through those reps. We talk to podcasters, live streamers all the time. Like, show number 2 is going to be better than 1. 3 is going to be better than 2. And it's and you gotta even the most gifted people, or if you think you're gifted, right? You've got to humble yourself and just go through the motions, because you are going to get better than you are, no matter how gifted you are when you start. I love that you went there, and you're right. It applies to many different businesses. There's no secret sauce to it. You've got to do it.
Did y'all hear that?
I love that
soundbite. No secret sauce to it. Just got to do it. Look at that. Ryan, baby.
See, let me get Chad Zilla going. I gotta get Chad Zilla going and tell her.
Make a shirt.
Reply to me in a Detroit accent. Okay.
Yeah. RK3. So you talked a little bit about video. And so let's say it's a aspiring speaker. Would you say there's a certain video or series of videos they should do? Because I know Chris and I, when we're looking at people to potentially be guests, we're looking for that virtual presence. Like, what do they look like? What do they sound like? Anything in particular you think they should focus on?
That is a really good question. I don't know if there's anything specific that I would say you got to do this one thing first. I would say you've got to be interesting. Right? You got to be you got to be
never be
interesting.
Boring, right?
And one of the best ways to be interesting is to have a story to tell. What is something that you can use? What is what's the word that I'm looking for? What is a vehicle? What is an asset that you can use to get the audience's attention? And again, as we talked about earlier, put them inside of their mind so that they can begin to play a video or pull up an image, because those ideas automatically connect to people's emotions. If you can connect to people's emotions, then you've got them. So have something interesting to say. Let's go back. Story worthy. Capture your stories. Write them down. Anybody that asks you a question, okay, pull up a story for that. Okay, easiest place for them to start.
Yeah, because we had a guest too, and it reminds me is, Chris and I could state a lot of facts about tech, but it's like there's no story. And at some point, it's like, I don't need someone to regurgitate how the microphone works, but here's how using this product helped me do X, Y, and Z, and why it made such a difference. That's going to be, I think, more interesting than just saying what the thing does.
Not just the product, it's the experience or the gap that the product filled. So before using this, what were you experiencing? Oh my gosh. I was trying to live cast or live stream using Google Hangouts, and I was finding that it was glitching and it was lagging, and I was wondering why nobody ever saw it, because whatever it is. And then I found this thing, and as I go through storytelling frameworks, stories are comprised of 4 main elements: context, characters, conflict, and conclusion. But in every story, there is something that I call a catalyst or an inflection point that changes the behavior of the hero or the characters in that story. So you're saying, I was going through this, I was doing this, this is what I was experiencing, these were the challenges that I was having. And then I realized that I needed to do this. That's the catalyst. That's that inflection point. And then I realized I needed to do this. And so I decided I was going to purchase a Shure SM7B microphone because I wanted to. Yeah.
Hey.
Available in the
Available in the carousel on Amazon.
Right. So that is essentially storytelling, dealing with the challenge and then dealing with the change after you go through the catalyst.
Love it.
Man, I had so many more questions to ask.
Already?
We're up against the time.
Whoa.
I want to be sure that, to be sure that anyone who's viewing and listening to this is going to anywhere. Like, he's on every tube imaginable, ladies and gentlemen. RobertKennedy3.com, and you can connect with him on LinkedIn. He's on Facebook. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Fantastic content. Has been going live now for ever since the webcam has been invented. And so you've got to check out his content. I have been, it's just been, for me, not only having you on the show, but sir, the years of content that I've absorbed from you, and you've made me better. So I appreciate you taking the time and joining the show.
Sure.
But I did have one last question. I had heard a rumor that you are an introvert.
That's what Myers-Briggs says to me all the time. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So
you do not seem like, I guess maybe introvert's this word where you think it's like some mouse that's in the corner, or wallflower necessarily, but I'd heard a rumor that you were an introvert, and here you are taking the stages internationally, and obviously a fantastic virtual presenter as well.
Well, people have...
How do you manage that?
misinterpreted or bought into the myth of what an introvert is. So when people hear the word introvert, they automatically think shy, withdrawn. And introversion versus extroversion is a matter of energy. So I am the opposite of my wife. My wife is a flaming extrovert, right? My wife is like, you go to Six Flags, she wants to shut the place down. Like, wait until the fireworks are done and the dude is plugging out the last roller coaster. She wants to be there around the people, doing all the things. I'm like, okay, 3 hours, my battery's like here, right? I'm ready to go, babe. Yeah, I'm done. So introversion is people. When I'm around people, and this sounds bad to say it this way, but this is the only way I know how to say it. When I'm around people, people drain me. With my wife, people energize her, right? And so what I've got to do is prepare for the situations that I'm heading into. I got to prepare for the result that I want. If I want to be in a space where people walk away from me energized, where they walk away from me ready to transform and change and say, oh my gosh, that RK3 dude, I had such a great experience around him. I prepare for that, right? And I prepare for that by being by myself sometimes. I prepare for that by waking up early and charging my battery by myself because I know that I've got to be on stage in a couple of hours. And then I get on stage, I'm like, give it to him, bam, bam, give it, so I give the energy. And then when I'm done, I'm with people, high five, greet people. But then sometimes people are like, you want to come to happy hour? I'm like, no, I'm going to go back to the hotel, right? Because I've got to recharge for the next day, or I've got to recharge for later. So that's what that means for me.
Yeah. Excellent. Man, I'm glad we ended on that moment. It feels like every time you answer a question, there's a story. And it's and I mean that in the best way. No, I do. Even if you don't tell a story, it almost feels like the way you're saying, the way you're answering it is a story. It's just in your DNA, sir. And I appreciate that. I've learned a ton. And, a lot of times, Jim and I, we say this. We have a podcast, but it's really free consulting for us. So we appreciate the consultation, sir, and you consulting the viewers and listeners of Dealcasters. Thank you for all that have joined. It's a bummer that we couldn't pull up the chat from LinkedIn, but man, Natalie Gregg on fire, Doug Lehman, Jenny Gold, Rich Graham, Sue Ann Babbitt's in the house, and with lots of comments here from YouTube. We appreciate everyone for joining. Make sure you follow Robert Kennedy III, or as the cool kids call him, RK3. Robert, anything else that we need to drive home with the folks, or are we just gonna drift off?
Man,
into the
let's ride our bikes down a hill. You know what? When you sent me the invite for this, I would have loved to get to the point where we talk tech a little bit, but we don't have time to do that. So let's do it next time, man. Let's set another time up where we can talk tech a little bit too.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. You are as much a tech geek and nerd as we are, and we could chop it up and talk about everything as it relates to microphones and cameras and lighting and
virtual presenting,
broadcasters, video casters, and all kinds of stuff. But you bring the energy, sir. So high five to you. We appreciate you joining us, and for everyone else, as always, don't fear the gear.
Thanks for listening to Dealcasters. Congratulations, you've taken another step forward in your content creation journey. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe or follow button here in your favorite podcast player so you can be reminded every time we drop an episode.
We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. And if you're wanting to watch our shows live on Amazon, feel free to follow Dealcasters Live as well at dealcasters.live. Follow us on Twitter, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we also included added content that you cannot find anywhere else.
If you have questions about this episode, or have something you want us to review, you can also email us at dealcasters@dealcasters.live. Thanks again for listening, and you know the deal. Don't fear the gear.